Okay, we finally made it out of Matthew 5, flying through the Sermon on the Mount. We're going to take a look at Matthew 6, verses 1 through, what are we going to do? 8, 9. So Jesus is going to talk in this section about almsgiving, and then part 1, if you will, about praying. And then part 2 we'll look at next time, which is going to be amplifying his teaching on prayer. He's going to teach us the Our Father. We want to look a little bit more in depth at that, so we'll separate those two this time. And then the third thing is going to be regarding fasting. So almsgiving, prayer, and fasting. Typically we think of these things in Lent. It's Advent, which is a minor penitential season. That's why we wear purple during Advent, so maybe it'll be helpful for us. So Matthew 6, verse 1. Jesus says, "Beware of practicing your piety before men in order to be seen by them. For then you will have no reward from your Father who is in heaven. Thus, when you give alms, sound no trumpet before you, as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and in the streets, that they may be praised by men. Truly I say to you, they have their reward. But when you give alms, do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing, so that your alms may be in secret, and your Father who is in secret will reward you." Let's work our way through that first, and then we'll look at the section on prayer that Jesus begins to introduce. So as I'm looking at this passage earlier and praying with it, one of the things that came to mind was it's helpful to maybe think about how do we make decisions about moral acts? Like whether or not something was an objectively good act or not a good act. There's three things we look at. What is the object of my choice? What is my intention? And what are the hoped for consequences? The first thing I look at is the object of my choice. What am I choosing to do here? If that's a good act, then I go to the next two, my intention and the hoped for consequences. If the object of my choice is not a good act, then my intentions and my consequences, or the hoped for and consequences, are really irrelevant. Why does that all come to mind? It comes to mind because Jesus is distinguishing between somebody who is giving alms, a good act. That's the first thing I'm looking at. The object of my choice is to give alms. That's what I'm doing. But I can do that with one of two different intentions. Jesus says, beware not to do these things in order to be seen. So here's somebody who's doing an objectively good thing. I'm giving alms, but I'm doing it with the intention that you'll think I am an amazingly generous guy. Like, wow, Ricardo is just like incredibly kind. And that's what I wanted. I didn't want to give alms. I wanted you to see it, to be impressed with me. Here's another person, same amount, same object. I'm giving alms, but I'm not blowing a trumpet in front of me. I'm not walking up to the front of the collection box going, dropping in all the change so that everybody hears all these gold coins dropping in the basket. I don't care that anybody ever sees it. I don't tell anybody. I don't do anything like that. We're both doing the same object, but we have vastly different intentions. This person over here who did it in order to be seen, it's no longer a good act, even though it has good benefits for the people who receive the alms. This person over here, it's a good act. So the Lord's trying to get us to look interiorly over why we are doing what we are doing, whether it's almsgiving, praying, or fasting. So remember, discipleship here, we want to try to think with his mind. I want to love with his heart. I want to will with his will. Jesus does not care what people think of him. I've always thought that's one of the most unnerving things about Jesus, especially to the religious leaders. Like, this guy is so free. He's not bound by their opinion. How many of us, unfortunately, are just that? We're bound by the opinions of others. We so want to be thought highly of that we end up doing things at times so that people will think highly of us. I pray that makes sense. The Lord wants to help me to grow in freedom. Now, important thing here. I am made in such a way, and you are made in such a way that I want to be honored. Like, I want to be acknowledged. I want to be esteemed. I want to be recognized. That's how God's made me. That's why Jesus talks so often in the scriptures about using imagery of reward, to the one person 5 talents, here's 5 talents more. Well done, good and faithful servant. Enter into the joy of your master. Like, I want to hear that. That's a good desire that I have. The challenge is make sure that the only one I want to please is God. There's this awesome song by a Christian songwriter named Sarah Groves called, that's a dangerous thing of doing these things I'll find it and I'll have John put it underneath the bottom so that you'll see it coming underneath there. I have Halfsheimer's, not Alzheimer's yet, it's only kicking in halfway, but there's this awesome refrain where she just says, I live and I breathe for an audience of one. And I used to do so many things in my life to win the esteem of men, to win the approval of men, to be thought highly of by men, women too, her words. But now, she says, all I'm doing is I'm living and breathing for an audience of one. All I want is for God to say, well done. That's all Jesus lives for. He knows the Father's good pleasure in him. And so because of that, he's not dependent upon what other people think of him. So that's a first thing maybe to talk about in our discussion afterwards. What are those things that I do? How free am I? Maybe if I've grown in freedom in this area, how can I share that with other people in the group and kind of just express my own desires or express my own growth in that area? And maybe those of us who are not free to just acknowledge that and say, like, I'm still struggling in this area of my life. Like, I do certain things to win the approval. I do them in order to be seen. If we're going to help each other to grow, that's a great way to be able to do this, is we can be vulnerable with each other. The other thing that comes to mind here quickly is just what's alms. So we talk about tithing and we talk about alms. Tithing is, we often talk about it as being 10% of our income. The reality is like 100% of my income is God's, not 10%. But typically Christians for, time immemorial have kind of tithed. It's 10%. Those of you who come from Protestant backgrounds, it's very familiar for most of you. For most Catholics, that's just totally foreign. Catholics don't tithe, by and large. Catholics give to needs. Wow, the roof blew off in the hurricane. We got to build a new roof. Here's, I'll write a check. And we do that. There's a need. We need a new air conditioner in the school. Pulling out the pen, writing a check. Here you go. But regularly committing to giving, like every week or every month, most of us don't do that. That's a mark of discipleship, I would suggest. Whether it's almsgiving, prayer, even fasting, these things have to do with stewardship, like understanding I'm taking care of something, especially almsgiving. I'm taking care of something which has been entrusted to me that belongs to another. That's what stewardship is. Stewardship is taking care of another's property. Everything I have, everything you have, it's a gift from God. Everything. Name something that we have that's not a gift. That's what St. Paul says in one of his letters. So tithing is that which I should just see as a check that comes automatically out of every paycheck that I get. I just have it direct deposited out of my account into Our Lady of Good Counsel. Every paycheck, boom, it just goes. So if that's not where you are, that might be another good discussion. Who here is tithing? Who here has made the effort to begin doing it and has experienced changes and transformations in their life? Who here is still struggling with it, and why? Let's help each other to get to a point where we can encourage each other to go, hey, like everything I have, this is at God's disposal. Not what does the church need, but understanding, no, I'm made by God to be generous, and in being generous, that's how I find life. And most of us have a tight grip on our time and our money, and we don't realize that we're actually making an idol of it. An idol is anything I look to outside of God for my hope. And for a lot of us, our trust is in things other than him. You're never going to have enough money to begin to tithe. Ever. I'll wait till I get to that income. Never going to happen. So that's tithing. What's alms? Alms are gifts to the poor over and above what I tithe. So notice Jesus doesn't say, if you happen to have a chance to give alms. He says, when you give alms. Not if, when. So it's an expectation. I'm going to give alms. I don't know about you, but I'm often struck by, I'm driving on Telegraph or some other road or getting onto 96 and there's the intersection. Here's a guy, sign. Help, please. I don't know if that's Jesus. Well, I know it's Jesus, actually. I know it's Jesus. He might be doing a scam, but I know it's Jesus. And I'm sitting there going, oh man, I didn't bring my wallet, sorry. Of course I got my wallet with me. I can't tell you how many times I've driven past the person and then I feel like the Lord's just going, you got to turn around and go back. And I know it's happened to you too. Maybe share some stories about that, how we've encountered Jesus in being generous to the poor. So alms is, or are, those gifts that I'm going to give over and above what I tithe. We should tithe to our parish, like I tithe to Our Lady of Good Counsel. I give alms to a whole host of other charities and people who are in need. That's what Jesus is resonating in my heart as I'm praying in this passage. Let's look real quick at verses 5 through 9. And then this is the setup for the teaching on the Our Father. Jesus says, when you pray, no, when, not if. When you pray, you must not be like the hypocrites. For they love to stand and pray in the synagogues and at the street corners, that they may be seen by men. Truly I say to you, they have their reward. But when you pray, go into your room, shut the door, and pray to your Father who is in secret. And your Father who sees in secret will reward you. And in praying, do not heap up empty phrases as the Gentiles do, for they think that they will be heard for their many words. Do not be like them, for your Father knows what you need before you ask him. And then starting in verse 9, he's going to begin to teach the Our Father. There's a couple things that come to mind here that might be helpful. My dad didn't pray in order that I would see him. But he certainly wanted me to see him pray. His motive was to be with the Lord in prayer. That was his intention. But I know he also was trying to model for me, this is what a man does. If he hadn't, I never would have seen it. And I don't know what would happen in my life. So be careful that we don't misread Jesus and miss the essence of what he's trying to say here. He's trying to get me to look at my intentions. But he doesn't mean literally you have to go pray in a closet every day or in your room. We as Christians need to be visible witnesses to one another of almsgiving, prayer, fasting, whatnot. I just want to make sure that I'm not doing it with a motive of I want you to be really impressed with me. But as a pastor or a priest in a parish, I don't pray so that people in the parish will see me. But by all means, I need people in the parish to know I pray. Otherwise, what good would I be? If you never saw me pray, you'd probably go, I don't know, something seems to be missing in his life that I would expect to have been there. So I'm not there so that you'll go, wow, Father's really holy. He's always in the church. But I am there to try to model prayer. But I'm not doing it with the intention that anybody would think anything of me. I just want my children, spiritually, to see me pray. As a mom or as a dad, similar kind of thing if you still got kids at home. So that's one thing that's key. Second thing that's key here, so Jesus says something that often kind of gets thrown back at us who are Catholic. In praying, do not heap up empty phrases as the Gentiles do, for they think that they will be heard for their many words. Do not be like them. In one of the translations, it's do not babble like the pagans. And people immediately think, so this means don't ever repeat the same words. So the rosary, the Our Father, things of that sort. So to babble here, that just means to talk aimlessly. It doesn't mean repetition, it means vain repetition, empty repetition. Jesus prays the Psalms over and over and over again. How do we know that? Because it was part of the life of the synagogue. It was part of the Jewish life. Certain Psalms, I mean, the life of prayer is built into the day. And the Lord, especially when he's in the synagogue, he's reading the scriptures, he's praying and reciting the Psalms. The night of the Last Supper, they go out, they sing a hymn. What's the hymn? They're singing the Psalms of ascent up the Mount of Olives. So babbling, I could be praying the rosary babbling if I am vainly repeating the words, but I could also just be repeating the words. And those are two really different things. So don't be misled by that. The key here is going to come in the next part. Why do the pagans babble? Because there's something really different between religion and faith. So the pagans are very religious. They do all sorts of external observances. They pinch incense and burn it to the gods. They mumble these prayers and whatnot. But their hearts are entirely away. This is just a rote external exercise. Faith, remember, it's God's work in me to which I'm responding. The pagans don't know that God is a father. We do. Which means if he's father, I'm his son. And he's a good father. And he knows what I need even before I ask him, even if I don't know what I need. And he wants me to talk to him as his child, coming to him, not trying to coerce him, not trying to practice magic here, like if I just say this formula 3 times, then I'm going to get what I need. Praying is not rubbing the genie in the lamp. Praying is a heart-to-heart conversation. Praying is me looking at him and him looking at me. Praying is wasting time with the beloved. Praying is just being there in his company. That's the essence of what is really coming to mind as I'm praying with this today. And then we're going to get to next week, and we're going to see Jesus say, no, don't be like that. When you pray, say this. Start this way. Say, Father. And that one word, that changes everything. Because the word is a word of relationship, intimacy, familiarity, family. And the pagans don't know that. They don't know who God is. They don't know who they are. We do. So maybe the takeaway this week in a particular way is, let's just thank the Lord for the gift of intimacy that we have with him, that I can come into his presence, like anytime. Now, you can't come into my presence anytime. You got to go through Kathy, and you got to try to get an appointment. And it might take you a week, or 3, or 5. You can't just call up the president and go see him. But you and I can come into God's presence anytime we want. And we're his beloved children, and he's our good father. And he wants to continue to help us put on the mind and love with the heart and will with the will of his son. Because the more that I become conformed to Jesus, the more authentic and full I become. So let's share some experiences, almsgiving, praying, modeling these kinds of things for each other. Let's share some struggles. Let's continue to just try to be open with each other and vulnerable. Encourage one another. Share some best practices, things that I've found that help me get free. Mindful that that's how this continues to work. We need each other. I need you to help me. You need me to help you. And we all need God to help us to be what we need to be. God bless.